Well, yesterday, federal prosecutors arrested two Chinese nationals accused of establishing a Chinese police station in Manhattan. The illegal outpost is believed to be one of more than 100 of these Chinese Communist Party's outposts that have been stationed around the world. They're used to monitor and intimidate overseas citizens of China, especially those who are critical of the communist regime. This is quite remarkable. And the brazen efforts of the Chinese to intimidate people who have left. Now, I've worked with some Chinese dissidents who have been here in the country on the religious freedom issue who report that they're being tracked and harassed. Well, join me now to discuss this and more is Senator Marco Rubio. He serves on 5 Senate committees, including the Senate Intelligence Committee, where he is the vice chairman. He represents the state of Florida. Senator Rubio, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. Let me ask you this. What does yesterday's arrest of 2 Chinese nationals operating this illegal police station in Lower Manhattan tell us about the Chinese Communist Party's ambitions?
Well, I think it should tell us that they have no limits to what they're willing to do to further their agenda around the world. They don't respect boundaries and borders in other countries. So they basically had agents operating inside the United States for the purpose of harassing and in many cases trying to lure Chinese Americans back to the mainland of China, where they can then obviously do whatever it is they needed to do to punish them for speaking out against China, for having positions. In some cases, by the way, they're harassing people in the U.S., Chinese Americans, because of what their relatives are doing back inside of China, like we've seen with Uyghur Muslims and the like.
Right.
So it shows you that we've reached the stage now where they're not afraid to operate inside of our country in this manner.
Does this say something about America's resolve to stand up to China? I mean, it's one thing for them to be flying a spy balloon over our country, but to be setting up these outposts of their public safety, what they call their public safety ministry. I mean, this is pretty brazen.
It is. Look, I mean, I don't know of any other precedent for it. And if any other country has ever done that inside the United States. It says a lot as well about the perception of America and the rest of the world. I mean, they watch our newscasts. I want to be frank. Watch our society and our culture imploding from within. They see we're a country obsessed with things that aren't true, like men pretending to be women and all these other things. We have a president who cannot put sentences together coherently. In America, that is constantly beating up on itself and talking about how terrible we are. They see a great power in decline. And they think that they are now strong enough that they can challenge us in this way. It does speak to that, and it's the reality, and one that we're going to have to do something about.
Senator, the Chinese Defense Minister Shang Fu is in Moscow this week, strengthening ties with Vladimir Putin. Now, the Biden administration has tried to pressure Beijing, as if they were a friend, into pushing Putin to end the war in Ukraine, but it appears that they've only grown closer. Your thoughts on that?
Well, that's right, because what's happening is the Chinese and the Russians both share a common goal, and that is they want a world that's no longer a world where America is the most powerful country. They want a multipolar world in which there is a sphere of influence that's at least equal, if not more powerful, to the U.S.-led free alliance. And they've partnered up in that regard. And whatever differences they may have had historically, they share this common goal of diminishing the U.S.'s standing in the world and increasing their own. And so you see them doing things like not just aligning with one another, but you also see them going around the world trying to undermine our existing long-term relationships. The Brazilians are now cozying up to them. The president of Brazil was there very recently. Other countries that have gotten closer to China, you saw the deals they've cut in the Middle East with the Saudis and Iran. So it is a direct attack on America's influence in the world and the goal of creating an alternative and ultimately a replacement to American leadership.
That's a frightening concept because it will alter not just things here in the United States, but literally have implications worldwide. We just have a couple minutes left. I want to switch topics to the life issue. You've been very outspoken in your time in the United States Senate. You've led on the life issue, and you've introduced a measure called the Providing for Life Act. Tell us about that.
Well, I think we want to be pro-life at every stage. And so that means that if someone comes into difficult circumstances, is in difficult circumstances, and learns now that they're pregnant, we don't want that woman feeling like a child is a burden. Children should not be a burden. And so I think we have an obligation to protect and to support women who decide to carry children to term. And so that includes things, for example, like not just the assistance to them if they may need sort of things like child support, as an example. I mean, in many of these cases, you have fathers who are responsible for that life who decide that they're going to take off, and it costs a lot of money and a lot of effort and time. It can be exhausting for women to chase after the men who are responsible for this to do their part for supporting that child. It means helping women continue to go to school, making accommodations so they can continue their degrees at colleges and universities and not lose their financial aid because they have to take a semester off and what have you. So it's a host of things that we've come up with to be supportive of mothers who decide that we're going to carry our children to term, because what we're trying to say here is, irrespective of the circumstances by which that pregnancy came about, that is a human being, and no human child, whether they're born or still in uterus, should be considered a liability, should be considered a burden, something bad that's happened. It's a blessing.
And Senator, you were reelected handedly, won a major reelection. There were some that were saying that the life issue was a liability to Republicans. It wasn't a liability for you. You spoke very clearly about it. Is the problem the Republicans are running from an issue that they have really owned for so many years?
Well, I think the most important thing is to be genuine about where you stand on this issue. I understand that this is a conflictive issue and that there's public opinion that's divided in the country over it. And that's why it's important to point out that what the Supreme Court decided last year was that all they decided was that elected officials at the state level could decide what your state laws are. But I've been pretty clear with people. I believe human life is worthy of the protection of our laws. I don't think that protection goes away because you're only 9 days old or 9 weeks old in your mother's womb. I think that's a human life. That's the only thing it could become. It is a living being that is growing and developing, and that deserves the protection of our life. They're the most vulnerable.
Yeah.
Of all the people, the most vulnerable is the unborn. They can't hire a lawyer. They can't vote. They don't have a name yet. And we should protect them, and our law should protect them. And I just speak frankly about it. I've been consistent on it my whole life. It's a moral issue to me, not a political.
And we appreciate you for doing that. Senator Marco Rubio, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Tony.